Welcome, my friends. Welcome to Project TAS. Today we're doing the first of a series of episode reviews centering on one of my favourite science fiction series of all time, Blake 7. Blake 7 was a BBC production that ran for 52 episodes over 4 seasons between 1978 and 1981. It was made with virtually no money, hence the rather awful special effects, but where it lacked in visual production, it made up for in story, character, writing and acting. For me, it's up there with Doctor Who, possibly beyond it in terms of British science fiction programmes, and despite its dated visuals, it more than holds its own on the world stage as well. Each of my instalments will review anything between 1 to 3 Blake 7 episodes. I'll try and release them every couple of weeks, probably a bit longer than that if I'm fair. There'll also be a brief end of season review for each season. I'll be marking each episode using a star allocation, similar to one used by a film critic called Leslie Halliwell. He would allocate 4 stars as the top mark, 0 stars as the bottom. I'm not aware if there was a certain rule to his star allocation, whether certain things would qualify it for a star, or if it would receive no stars at all, regardless of how good certain aspects of the film were, for example, the visual effects or the music. What I will say is that he was incredibly stingy with the star allocation. I would guess that between half and 2/3 of the films in his book are given 0 stars, and he would try to review every single film that was released at a cinema that had been released up to that year. In fact, at the end of the books, there would be a separate section listing the films that he'd given 4 stars and the year of their release. His star allocation was actually so tight, he ended up doing the same for 3-star films in later editions. So when you reach the end of my series review and you think I've barely allocated the episodes any stars, please don't think it's a reflection of hate against Blake 7. As I've already stated, I love it and will do so to my dying days. But I hope this will properly reveal the decent episodes from the not so decent and the classics from the dreck. I will also point out that this is a personal list with my own feelings as to what an episode should be given. Doubtless my opinion will marry up with the opinions of the majority in a lot of cases, but there will inevitably be some episodes regarded as brilliant, which I think are mediocre, and others regarded as the pits, which I actually might award a star or so to, possibly even more stars. As I say, it's a personal list containing my personal, not meant to offend opinion. I will do my best to explain for each episode. There will also doubtless be a lot of inconsistency in my marking. I might say that there's something about an episode which I mark it down for, and the same problem exists with another episode, and I still give it quite high marks. I welcome all comments from any and everybody, whether you agree or disagree with my allocation, whether you like or dislike my reviews, and I do look forward to reading everyone's comments and the wide range of opinions that are out there. Finally, and this will be an obvious one, the episode reviews will no doubt contain huge spoilers, not just for the particular episode I'm reviewing, but potentially for the series as a whole. Now, I suspect that the majority of you will have watched a lot of Blake 7 before, probably all the episodes, but to those who haven't watched it before or a certain episode, you may want to watch it before watching my reviews. You have been warned. Now, let's get to it, shall we? Typical that the first episode I need to review may arguably be the most difficult one to do a review on. I already know there are going to be more than a couple of episodes in Blake 7 that I'm going to describe as not really being what Blake 7 is about. In the case of The Way Back, it may be what Blake 7 is all about the most. And it doesn't have the Liberator, or Avon, or Callie or Gan, or Aurak. Jenna and Villa are barely in it. Maybe that's the point. All the colourful character interactions, the invincibility of the ship they fly, all absent here. It's Blake against the state in its rawest form, and given that Blake, like us, doesn't even know anything about his previous life against the state, there was only ever going to be one winner in this inaugural squaring off. Our first look at Blake 7, once the titles are finished, is of a surveillance camera. Very apt. Very Big Brother. This combined with the la-di-da music in the background and the hypnotised way people walk through the corridors gives an eerie feeling of control, and by extension, oppression. No one here is free. We then follow Blake as he meets up with 2 friends and takes the uncertain and ultimately illegal step of walking out of the city boundaries and into the outside world. His first dose of reality since his brainwashing, which we learn more about later. Despite the rebellious nature of his companions, Blake is evidently very pro-state, pointing out the unlawfulness of their exiting the city, the unpleasant taste of fresh water, and wanting to report the rebels to central control. It's not until he is told about his past as a freedom fighter, the conditioning he has been subjected to, and the deaths of his family, that Blake starts to open his eyes. He is not as subservient to the Federation that protects him. It is at least a new beginning for him. He then makes the unexpectedly life-saving decision to walk off to clear his head. This is the very moment the Federation troops decide to ambush the Resistance meeting, leaving no survivors. What I found rather peculiar about this is that the Tarrant character, who I feel I should refer to as the baddie Tarrant, does not confirm that Blake is among the dead as soon as the massacre is completed. Especially that in addition to being able to recognise him, Blake is of course very recognisable as a former Resistance leader. With this in mind, surely it would have been easy to just have him killed when he walked through the door into the dome and pass it off as part of a minor leaving the city offence. This also leads to the fact that no one recognises Blake among the general populace. They erase his memory, yes, but what about everyone else? Blake is allowed to mingle with the populace and not one of them feels the need to tell him about his prior life. Weird. Is he not recognisable? We already know that his resistance cell was a big deal, presumably why he was subjected to all the brainwashing and conditioning and made to renounce the rebels, saying he'd been misled and trump up the administration, rather than just kill him and make him a martyr. Live out his life as a fallen idol and no one speaks to him about his former life? I doubt it. Anyway, Blake is captured rather than killed, shortly after deciding to return to the city following the massacre. He is given a defence lawyer whom Blake informs he will plead guilty. That is until it is revealed to him what charges he actually faces. Essentially, he is branded as a paedophile, which is a massively controversial crime to give to your central character, even if it is a fabricated one, especially since Blake 7 is meant to be a kids' show. I was a little bit surprised when I learned this about Blake 7, as my mother, who was the one who got me into Blake 7, was 24 when this episode first came out, and she's been in love with the show to this day. Not exactly a child, but then that says something about the wide appeal of the programme, and the way back demonstrated right from the off that this programme would be willing to take risks. After Blake is inevitably found guilty of the child molestation charges, he is sentenced to live out his life on the penal colony Cygnus Alpha, 8 months' travel from Earth. He manages to convince his defence lawyer Varren to look at the case a little more deeply. Varren in turn finds the pile of dead bodies that are amazingly yet to be removed from the scene of the ambush, but is himself killed along with his wife by baddie Tarrant when they make their way back to the city to present the evidence. Blake, who has met Jenna and Villa by this point, and it is clear that they will be main characters from the off, is awaiting extradition to Cygnus Alpha, but is hoping his lawyer will arrive in time to have the conviction looked into and obtain a holding order to delay his departure. It isn't surprising that this does not come to pass, but despite the fact we expect to be disappointed, we are still disappointed. We very quickly grow to hate the administration and the various slimy individuals representing it. As if it isn't appalling enough to brainwash and frame its citizens in the first place, it executes the people that actually represent the state when those people try to do the right thing. So as much as we expect Blake to ultimately become its latest victim, or rather its latest repeat victim, we still have a knot in our stomach when the London takes off with Blake in confinement. But when he says that he's coming back, we believe him, and we are with him.
No, I'm coming back.
If it was confined to Earth, following Blake and the various individuals that either help or hinder his story, maintaining this setting and this tone, this would be one of those dark but infamous sci-fi stories told over half a dozen episodes, but enough to go down in history as a mini classic. The fact that it ended up being 4 seasons covering 52 episodes and became an even bigger classic is nothing to regret. Blake 7 is Britain's answer to Star Trek, and it does this without trying to be Star Trek. It comes at the Federation from a completely different angle and portrays the state as a totalitarian dictatorship, where its populations are controlled, drugged, and are merely a presence on a planet, sometimes an inconvenient one, rather than a population to care for and protect. Blake and his crew are the good guys, the only ones we can really follow, the only ones we would want to follow, and even they are not what you would want in a ship's crew. While the crew in Star Trek would inevitably be the most professional, best of the best captain, best science officer, best helmsman, engineer, doctor, Blake's consortium have exceptional skill but are hardly professional. Not with him out of loyalty, more out of a lack of any other option. You either try to survive on the fastest, strongest, most powerful ship out there, or you don't. What would you do? Exactly. So do they. And that's another part of the appeal. There's constant conflict, differing of opinion. Avon doesn't count himself part of the crew, Villa hates having to help with missions, Callie seems most loyal to Blake, at least to begin with, but even Gan and Jenna question Blake from time to time despite their apparent devotion. It's a pity that this episode is not a proper representative of the series at large. Everything I've just gone over is not really represented here, at least not with this level of intensity in any of the other 51 episodes. Some have stated The Way Back as the worst episode of Blake 7 since it is nothing like the rest of the series. Others have declared it the best episode for more or less the same reason. Me? I have to say, when I first got this and Spacefall on video, I nearly always fast forwarded through this one and watched Spacefall. I found the way back far too depressing and downbeat to watch. But it goes without saying, that's the point of it. And I never thought of it as a bad episode. As I say, there's no other episode that shows Blake against the state in its most raw format. However, and I acknowledge a lot of people are not going to agree with me on this, I would suggest that while the follow-up episodes like Spacefall, Cygnus Alpha and Time Squad can more or less stand on their own as individual episodes, The Way Back needs those episodes with it to complete the introductory story. Not because it ends on a cliffhanger, but in order to more accurately show us what Blake 7 is all about. But it's good enough to supply the hook. We really want to find out what happens to Blake. So as depressing as it is, we know there could be light at the end of the tunnel. We still have hope. So what score do I give it? Well, it's definitely not the worst episode, but as a pilot, I don't know if it actually does its job to represent Blake 7. It needs help from the follow-up instalments. But as an episode, it's easily above the grain. Its production, directing and acting are indicative of what the series will be about. Not no stars and not 4 stars, so I'll meet it in the middle and give it 2, which by this scoring system is a damn good score. The reason for Blake's fight against the Federation is presented in this episode. Now let's get to the fight itself. It still may be missing an ingredient or two and the mixing together hasn't really taken place, but this feels much more like Blake 7. Following directly on from the launch of the London that concluded The Way Back, we rejoin Blake still in confinement as he departs Earth for the 8-month voyage to Cygnus Alpha. Villa and Jenna will get a lot more to do in this one, cementing their status as characters we will follow, and of course we are introduced to Avon, about 95% of Blake fans' favourite character, and you may consider me in this majority. The status of Gan is a little ambiguous given the limited speaking part he has in this episode. If anything, Nova may have appeared as a more obvious main character until he encounters his foamy demise in the crawlway. These would of course be our crew of heroes, minus Callie at this point. We would also encounter the Liberator, although we would not meet Zen until the next episode. Personally, I absolutely loved how Terry Nation slowly brings us into the Blake 7 world, focused on the primary character, with a couple of his crew doing little more than showing up. The second episode fleshes a few more characters out while introducing 1 or 2 more. The third would confirm who from the London was joining us, as well as tell us more about this hero spaceship. Anyone and anything else would be a bonus, as indeed it proved to be. But what about Spacefall itself? Well, we rejoin the travelling London as it begins its journey to Cygnus Alpha, dragging its consortment of prisoners who have been sufficiently doped up as to avoid any problems, or work, for the crew. The plot centres on the various opposing sides as the London's accidental encroachment upon a presumed space battle gives Blake and his not as doped up loyalists an opportunity to attempt a takeover of the ship. After the attempt fails and the London is able to pick up the pieces, it discovers one of the ships that presumably formed part of the presumed space battle, and after 3 of their men die in the attempt to board her, they start sending prisoners. And the rest, as they say, is history. An excellent story, one that is all the richer as it brings our heroes more into the limelight. On the subject of characters, it's wonderful to have such fleshed out baddies, something that would be repeated throughout the series. While the moustache-twirling evil Federation delegates are pretty much little more than that in The Way Back, which admittedly was amply enough to make us despise the Federation, here the baddies of the week are actually a lot more human, certainly in the case of Leyland and Artix, while Raker is an arrogant, psychopathic bully boy, but even he is a fascinating character. One that may have been fun to see again had he not bitten the dust at the end of this episode. Indeed, the baddies are more the opponents, or the obstacles to overcome, than your standard bad guy. Artex is swatting up for a command position, and Leyland is quietly just as appalled by Raker's bloodthirst as Blake. But of course, the best character of the lot, one we're glad is still about after Spacefall, is Kerr Avon, marvellously brought to life by Paul Darrow. Popular from the off, his cynical, self-serving arrogance is never held back, even when he agrees to help Blake with the rescue attempt. The stories, the themes and concepts are just some of the things we watch Blake 7 for. Avon is another, almost a concept unto himself, an independent entity. And he, like Villa, will be with us from this point onwards until the fateful end. While The Way Back had a somewhat depressing, almost hopeless tone to it, save for Blake's last line of defiance, Spacefall lets our characters take the fight to the Federation in the escape attempt. There's a lot more action to be had, and by extension, a lot more fun. We learn more about everyone in this episode, especially Blake. We get to see him through his actions and reactions to the situations as well as the different personalities he encounters. He is strong-minded, a natural leader who will lead his gang to the goal he believes they can achieve, although this belief in their goal will come to cloud Blake's judgment regardless of any warnings or objections that stand in front of him, but that's for later. Villa comes across as more cowardly than the slightly unbalanced thief presented in The Way Back, but he's still likeable. Jenna really comes across well. She's as strong-minded as Blake, as well as having a defined skill, in this case a pilot. Her apparent devotion to Blake and willingness to follow him is there from the beginning, but she is still her own character. The only weak link in terms of characters who would join the regulars is Gan. The late and great David Jackson was an excellent actor whose talents were not fully realised in Blake 7. If you need muscle, turn to Gan. There's not much else to him, even with the limited backstory. The likes of Raker and Leyland are fleshed out wonderfully for their guest parts in Spacefall. It says something that 15 episodes after this one, Gan doesn't come out of his shell much more than he does here. The focus isn't really on Gan, so the episode doesn't suffer from his lack of development, even if Blake 7 as a whole might. The only other minor niggle I have is the inept guards monitoring the prisoners, the willingness they display in letting Villa entertain, distract them, although even this fleshes out the guards as human and not your typical faceless guard. The conveniently placed crawlway, which leads all the way to the ship's computer room, stretches the credibility a fair way, although if, as Jenna says, the ship as a whole is old and should have been scrapped long ago, maybe even this is forgivable. Maybe. There is genuine intrigue and ultimately a mystery regarding the appearance of the Liberator. I love the premise of the unknown space battle and the fact our hero ship emerges from it. The question as to what this space battle, if it ever was a space battle, was all about never really gets answered. We get some proper backstory for the Liberator in the Season 2 premiere Redemption, but the battle itself remains unsolved. For Spacefall, it works. For a group of prisoners to find themselves on the most powerful ship in existence, the means of getting them there was always going to be a little contrived, but I think what Nation came up with in this episode works brilliantly. It's fast-paced, it's fun, packed with action, in-depth characters, and we know even more is just around the corner. Ordinarily, I would judge the presence of the crawlway a lot more harshly, but the rest of the episode around it is awesome. In fact, I originally gave this 4 out of 4 stars all those years ago when I first graded the episodes. No, it's not quite as good as that, but I'll leave it with 3 stars. For all the contrivances, it still packs a punch. Those are my reviews for the Blake 7 Season 1 episodes The Way Back and Spacefall. I hope you enjoyed them. Stay tuned for my next instalment. Please like this video, please share this video, please subscribe to my channel, and I shall see you on the way back.